All right. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jordan Garbayo. I am a program manager for the Energy Code Connect program under 3C REN. We're really excited to bring the residential additions course to you all today and have many more great trainings for you this winter covering electrification, heat pump water heaters, passive house, residential energy code, and building envelope. A lot more of that to come, but and of course we're going to give an overview of what 3C REN's programs are and its many current and upcoming offerings. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, I forgot I was in charge of that.
So before we get started, I wanted to provide a quick Zoom orientation. I know we've all been using Zoom a lot lately, but just worth noting. We've elected to keep this in a meeting format as opposed to webinar. So with that, we ask that you please mute yourself unless called on. If possible, please include your full name as your Zoom screen name. This will help us take attendance. To update your name, just click on right-click on your icon / current name and click rename. If you have a question, we urge you to please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Excuse me. I will be monitoring the chat, as will Sean Burns. If you have any questions, we can directly ask the questions to Russ. If you have a comment or a question, please use the raise your hand function under the participant tab, and we will try to get to you. Next slide, please. Perfect. Additionally, 3C REN staff are on this Zoom meeting with the background pictured here. If you have any questions related to 3C REN or the course, please chat with one of us if you need anything. Next slide. So quickly, what is 3C REN? 3C REN, or the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, is a collaborative partnership between the counties of San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura. We are designed to improve energy efficiency programs in our region by offering customized programs that fit the needs of our territory. 3C REN offers free services for professionals and households. For building professionals, 3C REN has industry training events, technical and soft skill trainings, as well as energy code compliance support. And for households, 3C REN offers free and discounted home upgrades to reduce energy use at home. Next slide. We are funded by ratepayer dollars so that we all pay on our utility bills, so PG&E, SoCal Edison, SoCal Gas. Our services were designed to return these ratepayer dollars to our local region. And our programs are an investment in our community, which has historically missed out on some of these ratepayer funds. Next slide, please. So we take a holistic approach to improving energy efficiency in our region, and we engage public sector staff and our local building departments, like building inspectors and plans examiners, as well as our private sector businesses like our architects and contractors. We also work with broader community members on how energy and buildings intersect into their everyday life, and our comprehensive services help us reduce energy use in our community and build capacity within the building industry. So next slide, please. So with that, thank you again for being with us. I'm going to hand it over to Russ from CalCERTs to get our course started here. Thank you and enjoy.
Awesome, thanks. All right, so this class, hi everyone, by the way, my name is Russ King, and I'm based out of, I work for CalCERTs, and we're based out of Folsom, California, and I'm currently located in the big town of Thornton, California, kind of in the Sacramento Delta, and it's a beautiful day outside. I hope it's nice where you guys are too. So this class is a cooperative effort between BayREN, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, and 3CREN. It's a series of classes that BayREN teaches on the California Energy Standards. This particular class covers residential additions, okay? And well, as with anything related to the energy code, you have to define it very precisely. So we'll get to that in just a second. So today's learning objectives, the main objective is to understand the energy code requirements as they apply to residential additions. And we also want to understand the overall compliance process, including how the compliance forms are used. If you're familiar with the energy code at all, you know that there's all kinds of forms. There's paperwork, okay? But there's a way to handle that. And so we're going to talk about that as well. We're going to maximize the value add of HERS registries, which is what I was just talking about. The HERS registry is a great way to keep track of all the paperwork. They will become familiar with the best practices for energy code compliance as they relate to addition. So energy code requirements for residential additions. The tricky part with additions is they come in a whole variety of sizes. You could have a little teeny tiny addition. Technically, if you add 1 square foot to your house, that's an addition. Or you can have, I've seen additions where the added part of the house was 5 times bigger than the original house. So they come in a very wide variety of sort of scale. And depending on the scale, you can either treat it like a brand new house, and so it'll be, you know, performance approach and, you know, all new walls and all new HVAC equipment, all that other stuff, or it can be really small, you know, a prescriptive addition. So that's kind of the tricky part about additions, is they just vary widely. So everything we say is going to kind of depend on whether they're modeling it using the prescriptive approach or the performance approach. And we'll talk about that in more detail. So the 2019 Building Energy Efficiency Standards affecting residential buildings now require photovoltaics in the prescriptive standards. However, this does not apply to additions. So that's very important to understand. That was one of the biggest changes to the 2019 code, is the requirements for PV, but they don't apply to additions, okay? Additions will have to comply with the efficiency requirements. And what that means is just the house itself has to be efficient, and you don't have to add PV onto it to make it comply. When adding onto a house, there are several different ways to approach the heating and cooling, the HVAC system. So you have an existing house that has a heating and cooling system, then you're going to add on to your house and make it bigger. How are you going to heat and cool that new part of the house? There's 3 basic ways to do that. The first one is to just extend the ducts from the existing system. And of course, that depends on the capacity of the existing system and how much capacity is being, or how much load is being added by the addition. We'll talk about increasing the size of the system and adding ducts out to the addition. And then kind of the brute force method is to just give it a whole new system for the addition itself, okay? And again, it just depends on sort of the size and scope of the addition. So the first option is you have an existing house, you have an HVAC system serving that existing house, you build on the addition, and all you do is you just run a duct out, or 2 or 3 out to the addition using the capacity of the existing system, okay? The only time that would ever trigger anything like HERS testing or duct sealing is if you added more than 40 feet of duct to the duct system. That's one of the triggers for HERS testing. And if you do, you would have to fill out a CF1R Alt 02, just like you would for an HVAC changeout or something like that, okay? The other option is to increase the size of the existing system on the house. So you put in a bigger system, maybe a bigger furnace, bigger air conditioner, okay? And then you add a duct out to the house. So the fact that you've replaced the existing equipment, that will trigger HERS testing all by itself. And so again, you have to fill out a CF1R Alt 02 in addition to the paperwork for making the addition comply. Then the final way to do it is just to give the addition its own new system. And depending on the kind of system that it would get, that may or may not trigger additional stuff. So in this diagram, what it looks like is being added here is a little ductless mini split, okay? So if you were to add a ductless mini split, you would have, you wouldn't have to do duct sealing. You might have to do refrigerant charge or something like that. So it just depends on the kind of system. If it's ducted, that'll definitely trigger HERS verification. And by, excuse me, I just noticed that this says, yes, if AC is added in climate zones 2 and 12. That's a Bayern thing. Refrigerant charge verification is required in climate zones 2 and 8 through 15. So if any of your climate zones are in those, which I think some of them are, it would trigger the refrigerant charge verification. Climate zones 2 and 12 are the only two that would require it in the Bayern zone. So sorry about that. Forgot to change that slide. All right, so for additions and alterations, the requirements for the prescriptive approach depend on whether or not the house has gas. Okay, is gas available to the house? And it gets into a little bit more specific definition of that for things like water heaters and stuff like that. But basically, if gas is available to the house, the code historically sort of favored gas appliances. And so you had to really sort of prove that you were going to be more efficient if you added electric appliances and replaced gas. Well, the 2019 code actually sort of encourages replacing gas with electric appliances. And so it's a lot easier to do than it used to be. So all electric homes and additions can still be made to comply even when there's gas to the house. And that's thanks mostly to heat pump water heaters and space heaters because they're very efficient. Another requirement is if you happen to install a completely new HVAC system for the addition, it triggers a whole bunch of mandatory measures. One of those mandatory measures is filtration. You have to have a MERV 13 filtration in any new ducted space conditioning system, okay? Also, if you have any kind of supply ventilation, you're ventilating the house, your indoor air quality mechanical ventilation, if it's the type that blows air into the house, that air has to be filtered with a MERV 13 filter, okay? And as far as the indoor air quality mechanical ventilation applies to additions, it's only if the addition is over 1,000 square feet, okay? A lot of little details going on here. You'll get a copy of these slides. You can also, in the residential compliance manual, there's a really good section on addition that kind of lists all this detail. All right, another mandatory measure that might get triggered depending on the scope of the project, all newly installed gas storage water heating systems must be readily upgradable to both tankless and heat pump. So section 150.0N talks about that. That's a mandatory measure. And that's only if you're installing a new water heater as part of the addition. If you have an existing water heater and you're changing that, it doesn't trigger this. But if you're installing a new separate water heater for the addition, it has a whole bunch of mandatory measures that go along with that, including pipe insulation. So pipe insulation requirements on new water heating systems and accessible pipes on altered systems are consistent with the California Plumbing Code. Okay, so basically all hot water piping between 3/4 inch and 1/4 inch must be insulated. Even on an alteration. And so an alteration is, let's say you have a gas water heater and you're upgrading that to a heat pump water heater, that's considered an alteration. And so what the mandatory measures say is all accessible pipes have to be insulated to these requirements, okay? So QII, that's a big one, quality insulation installation. That is a prescriptive measure on all new construction, and it applies to additions that are over 700 square feet. But it only applies to the new opaque surfaces. So new walls, new ceilings, new raised floors, and things like that. Those are the only surfaces where it applies. If you're using the performance approach, most users can opt out of it. They can model it away. But in new homes, that's really, really hard to do. In additions, it just kind of depends. It's not as hard to do. So you could technically model away the QII requirements on an addition over 700 square feet. So energy code documentation, documents, forms. That's what the energy code seems to be all about sometimes, is filling out stuff. The energy code compliance process relies heavily on documentation, and that is purely for enforcement, okay? You document something so that the enforcement agency can verify that it was done correctly. Keeping track of all this documentation can be very challenging. There are some very useful online tools that help you keep track of all the projects, okay? And they're called HERS registries. We taught a class on the HERS registry, how to use the HERS registry. There are 2 California HERS providers that the CEC has approved, CalCERTs, who I work for, and then oh gosh, this should say CHEERS. They tried to change their name to California Energy Registry, but the Energy Commission denied that request, and so it's CHEERS. Sorry about that. I forgot to change this slide too. Sorry, Jordan. So it'd say CHEERS, www.cheers, just like the TV show, .org, okay? So the CHEERS registry and the CalCERTs registry do essentially the same thing. They are supposed to keep track of all the documentation on any project that has at least one HERS test. And so I gave you some examples of things that trigger HERS testing: extending the ducts more than 40 feet, certain climate zones. If you add a refrigerant containing component, you have to do refrigerant charge verification, duct testing, indoor air quality testing. Those all trigger HERS verification. If one HERS test is required on a project, all the forms for that project have to be in one of the two registries, either CHEERS or CalCERTs, okay? And how do you know which one? It depends on which one it's registered with. That's kind of a tricky part. For new construction, it's really easy. You look at the CF1R and there'll be a watermark on the CF1R, and it'll either be the CHEERS watermark or the CalCERTs watermark. That's your signal to go check in one of those two registries. For alterations, it just kind of depends. If it's, and for additions, you probably have, you'll have a CF1R. And if it's registered with one of the two providers, it should have a watermark on it. The key is at the time of application for the permit, register. There's a lot of times where they kind of wait and they drag it out and they don't register it until later in the project. That just makes it harder to track everything. So it's really important when you get a project, especially if there's like a set of plans that go along with that project, is have them register it with either of the two providers so that you know where it is and that you can go find it there. And that's how you keep track of all the forms. So all you have to do is, once it's in the registry, all you have to do is log in and search for that project. And once you find it, you open it up. And if you're a building department, what you see is something called the Project Status Report, the PSR. Both providers are required to have a project status report. And here's an example of ours, the one from the CalCERTs registry. The CHEERS registry looks very, very similar. It's just, different font, slightly different format. But it's basically, so this is a list of all the forms for a big project. This is either a new construction, new house, or a big addition. But look at all the CF2R forms. There's like 10 CF2R forms. Then there's a bunch of CF3R forms, and you look over here, and this is the nice thing about it, is it lists all the forms specific to that project, and then off to the right, there's gonna be a green dot or a red dot telling you whether those forms are completed or not. If it's a green dot, that means it's done, it's signed, it passed, it's good to go. If it's a red dot, it means that they haven't done it yet, so they're still waiting for that particular form to get filled out, okay? So can't emphasize enough how great the HERS registries are as a tool for building departments to keep track of all the forms. It's been great. Projects are searchable by registration number, by address, by permit number, and things like that. So you just go on the registry, search for it, find it, open up the project status report. And then we've taught a class specifically on how to do that too. And if you maybe ask the 3C Ren guys, and we'll do it again for you guys. All right, so let's kind of step back a second and kind of look at the overall energy code compliance process, kind of get a big picture view of the process. Before diving into the details of a specific part of the code, it's important to understand the overall process and kind of where we are in that process, okay? So all projects have three basic types of, well, there's mandatory measures that kind of cover everything. And then there's two choices that you have on how to make a project comply. There's the simple approach and there's the complex approach, okay? The simple approach is simple, but it's more restrictive. And then the complex approach is very complicated. You have to hire a consultant, but it's very, very flexible in terms of what you can build, all right? And another name for those two approaches are the prescriptive path and the performance path. The prescriptive is based on just a list of features. Install what's on this list and your building or project will comply. On the performance path, you have to model the building. You have to create a computer simulation model of the building, of the project, and show that it meets the requirements. But the nice thing about that is you can trade things off. You can say, oh, I want the prescriptive requirement only allows me to put a certain amount of windows in my house, The performance path will let you put as many windows as you want, but you're gonna have to do something else to the house to make it efficient to offset that. So there's trade-offs there. So this applies to new construction, this applies to additions, this even applies to alterations if you wanted to. The prescriptive path will be used for most smaller, simpler additions. The performance path will be used for most larger, more complicated additions. There's no hard and fast rule as to which is which. It just kind of depends on how hard it is to make it comply to the energy code. Most energy consultants will try the prescriptive approach first and go, yeah, we can make it comply on the prescriptive. Or they'll say, no, you got way too much glass, or you got the wrong kind of walls, so we're gonna have to go to the performance approach, okay? The prescriptive approach is based on these tables. And these tables are called table 150.1-A, and that's basically a list by climate zone. You'll notice on this table, there's 16 columns. There's 16 climate zones in California. So you have to find your climate zone, whatever it is, and then you just go down that column and that tells you what you're supposed to do to that house. But if you use the performance approach, you're being compared to this list. So you have to have the same energy use as if you built it to this list, but you can put in whatever features you want. And that's what the computer simulation does, is it compares your proposed house to the standard house that has these features in it, okay? And then I got ahead of myself a little bit. So the performance approach then uses the computer simulation. It takes your house the way you want to build it, models that, figures out how much energy it's going to use, and then it takes your house, applies the prescriptive measures to it, models it. That energy use is your target, okay? So you've got your standard house, which has the prescriptive measures. That's your target. Then you have your proposed house, which is the way you want to build it. That's your actual energy use. Your actual energy use has to be better than or equal to the target, okay? All right, so mandatory measures must always be met. Those are things you trade off. They're found in section 150.0. They're listed on all the CF2R forms, and they include things like, what's the lowest efficiency air conditioner you can install in California, right? Lowest efficiency furnace. Things like, what's the least amount of wall insulation you can possibly have? These are bottom level minimums you can't go below. But then there are also things like lighting in a house. You have to have certain kinds of lighting and certain kind of controls. You just always have to do that. You can't put in more insulation and trade off your lighting requirements, because lighting requirements are mandatory measures. So let's look at this little diagram here. And if you haven't already, you'll get a copy of this as part of your handouts. This is something we came up with a while back, and it's a nice sort of one-page overall view of the entire energy code compliance process, okay? So look at this far left-hand column here where it says start here, and then there's 3 basic steps. If you break down the energy code compliance process into 3 basic steps, it makes a lot more sense, okay? So the first step is to figure out what's required, all right? Once you figure out what's required, it goes on to a document called the CF1R. The CF1R certificate of compliance is, catch me from my track. The CF1R is a list of what's required for that house. The CF1R depends on the project. It could be a CF1R Perf 01, okay? And that's a performance approach. But think of the CF1R as a list of what you're supposed to do. So step 1 is figuring out what you're supposed to do, put it on the CF1R, and off you go. Then step 2 is to install those things. So figure out what you're supposed to do, install it, and then document what you installed. That's part of part 2, is documenting what you actually put in. And that's the purpose of the CF2R. And then the last step, the third step, is to verify what you installed. So the 3 steps are figure out what you're supposed to do, install it, have somebody check it, all right? And if you just think of the energy code in those terms and in those 3 steps, it just kind of simplifies things and makes things a lot more easy to understand. So going back to the document, looking at the top part of that document, we have the step 1 CF1R, and here's our 2 paths, our 2 compliance approach paths. The performance approach is where you use the software. The prescriptive approach is where you use the tables. And the thing about additions is they can be in either one of these. New construction 99.99% of the time is going to use the performance path. Alterations like an HVAC change out or water heater replacement, 99.9% of the time, they're going to use the prescriptive path. But additions, it just kind of depends. Smaller additions will probably lean towards the prescriptive approach. Larger additions will definitely lean towards the performance approach, but you could have either one, all right? So the bottom line is you're going to have a CF1R that tells you what you're supposed to do. If you're using the performance approach, that CF1R is called a CF1R PERF, PRS, that means performance approach. If you're using the prescriptive approach, there's several different kinds of CF1Rs that you might use. There's a CF1R for alterations, CF1R Alto 2 for HVAC alterations. We talked a little bit about that. CF1R ADD for additions, and then the CF1R NCB for newly constructed buildings, but that's also for additions over 1,000 square feet, which you don't see too often for the prescriptive approach. If it's an addition over 1,000 square feet, I almost guarantee you they're going to use the performance approach for that. All right, now going down a section on that diagram, we have a set of plans here. So this represents the plans that are being submitted for that project. It should have all the areas and orientations on the plans, and those need to match the CF1R. And then also the important energy features should also be on the plans. Don't leave the energy features inside the CF1R. CF1Rs can be a little challenging to read, and they don't always get well circulated amongst all the trades. It's a good idea to take the important energy features like the wall insulation, the kind of windows, the R value of the walls, all that stuff, and put them on the plans. That's where the trades are going to look for that stuff. Once it goes through plan check, then the permit gets issued. And then once we start building the house or the project, let's take all the energy features, and there could be dozens and dozens of energy features, and we're going to split them into two basic categories. And those categories are determined by who is supposed to verify those. We'll call them HERS measures and non-HERS measures. HERS measures are inspected by a third-party special inspector called a HERS rater, okay? The non-HERS measures are verified by the building department. The HERS measures are typically things that require special equipment like a duct tester or a blower door or refrigerant gauges. The non-HERS measures are typically things that you can just read a label, like windows and R values and water heater efficiencies and things like that. The bottom line is, doesn't matter which kind of measure it is and who's verifying it, they all need a CF2R. The CF2R is the certificate of installation. Think of the CF2R as a signed affidavit by the installer saying they put in the right stuff, okay? And that's required regardless of whether it's HERS or non-HERS measure. So all measures get a CF2R. Then the HERS measures get one more form, and that's called the CF3R. That's the HERS verification certificate of verification. So the CF2Rs that are non-HERS measures don't get that. They're just inspected by the building inspector, and there's no additional documentation. Okay? So this diagram really kind of shows the HERS measures, they get their CF2Rs and they get their CF3Rs. The non-HERS measures get their CF2Rs, and then they're inspected by the building inspector. All the building inspector needs to do for the HERS measures is make sure those forms get filled out. And again, that's the beauty of the registry. You go into the registry, you find the project, you open up the project status report, and there's all the CF3Rs and all the CF2Rs, and they're either going to have a red dot or a green dot next to them telling you whether they're done or not. All right, so there it is in a nutshell. If you have any questions on that, feel free to ask. Let's dive into a little bit more detail about additions. Before we do that, I'm going to give you the secret decoder ring method of figuring out what the heck a form is. Okay, so you get all these forms from the Energy Commission or for the Energy Code, and they hand you this form, and let's say it's a CF2R EXC04, and you're like, what the heck is a CF2R EXC04? So you come in here, and this is the nomenclature for the forms. They all follow this basic format. There's going to be CF, it'll start with CF, okay, which means compliance form. And then there's going to be a number, CF 1, 2, or 3. The 1 is a certificate of compliance, the 2 is a certificate of installation, and the 3 is a certificate of verification. That's our 3 steps. Figure out what's required, what's installed, what's verified. Then there'll be an R for residential, and then there's going to be 3 letters, and those 3 letters will correspond to this list here. For CF1Rs, the 3 letters sort of describe the compliance approach and a little bit about the project. Is it prescriptive addition? Is it a prescriptive alteration? Is it a performance approach? So that's what those 3 letters will be. On the 2 Rs and 3 Rs, those 3 letters are going to describe sort of a part of the building, a building component. And so they're going to say things like envelope, ENV is envelope, EXC is an existing condition, MCH is mechanical, LTG is lighting, and so on. So it's like a code for the sort of the building component. And then there's going to be 2 more numbers, and that's just to separate all the different, there's like 20 different MEC forms. So there's a MEC 01, MEC 02, MEC 03, and all that stuff. And then at the very, very end is this little letter at the very end, and it's either going to be an E or an H. All the features, all the forms that end in an E are intended for the enforcement agency. All the forms with an H on the end mean those are HERS verified measures. So that's that last little letter is a kind of a clue as to whether it applies to a HERS measure or a non-HERS measure. All right, so there's your secret decoder ring. So obviously there's lots and lots of forms. There's 1 Rs, there's 2 Rs, there's 3 Rs. This is a list of all the forms that might be turned in with a project. So you can see it gets pretty extensive, but not all projects have all of these forms. And some of these forms are kind of mutually exclusive as well, but you still could have, a project that's got 14, 15, 20 different forms that are submitted with that project. And keeping track of them is the tricky part. The good news now is, since the 2013 code, is that they are all electronic. You can actually do the entire energy code compliance process without printing out a single piece of paper if you wanted to. A lot of people rely on paper. That's fine. If that helps you, your inspection process or whatever, that's fine, but you don't have to. You can actually do it without printing out any paper for all the forms. All right. For prescriptive projects that don't require any HERS measures. So that would be like replacing a water heater, replacing windows. It's possible that you could have a really small addition that did not trigger any HERS verification. If that's the case, they don't have to be registered with the HERS provider. Good news and bad news. The good news is they don't have to register with the HERS provider. The bad news is it's harder to track because the forms are all hard copy, or not hard copy, but they're independent forms, and there's no central location where you can go find them. All right. So for those kinds of forms, they used to be handwritten. They used to literally, you would fill them out with a pen. Okay. But now they're what's called dynamic forms. They're PDF forms. They're fillable dynamic forms. And now actually they're located on the Energy Code ACE website. Well, this weird thing happened that they used to be on the Energy Commission's website, but there was this disabled access rule that said all the forms have to have some kind of special features for disabled access. And they ended up migrating them over to the Efficiency First website. You can still find them on the Energy Commission's website, but they're a lot easier to kind of manipulate and work with on the Energy Code ACE website. There'll be a link at the end, by the way, for Energy Code ACE. So these are basically, instead of filling it out by hand, it's an electronic PDF. And the nice thing about them is they used to be like a 4-page form, and you would fill it out with a pen or pencil, and you only filled out the sections that you needed. So there's a whole bunch of unused sections in these forms. These new dynamic forms, you tell it what kind of project you're doing, and that form kind of shrinks down to just the parts that you need. So it really streamlines things. All right, so additions, talking about additions. What forms might you encounter when you're working with an addition? Well, you're gonna have a CF1R, and if you're using the prescriptive approach for the CF1R, the CF1R that will be used is called a CF1R ADD, ADD 01-E. This is used when prescriptive approach is used to demonstrate compliance for additions less than or equal to 1,000 square feet. Once you hit that 1,000 square foot mark, you go to a different form. It's called an NCB. We'll talk about that in a second. The prescriptive approach basically featured by climate. I showed you that table. Some prescriptive and mandatory measures will not apply because they're only triggered by additions greater than 1,000 square feet. The prescriptive approach is simple, but it's a lot less flexible. One of the things the prescriptive approach is restrictive on is the amount of glass that you can put in an addition, and that throws a lot of people off. If you're altering the HVAC system as part of the addition, and I showed you those three options at the beginning, those probably will trigger the CF1R Alto 2. So as part of the addition, you're altering the existing HVAC system. That will trigger things like duct sealing, refrigerant charge. If it's a completely new system, you might have airflow and fan watt draw, all these HERS measures and stuff like that. Okay, so that will be the CF1R Alto 2 to cover those HVAC alterations. The CF1R NCB, that's the one I was talking about. If the addition is over 1,000 square feet, it triggers some extra requirements such as indoor air quality. Okay, and so the CF1R for prescriptive additions over 1,000 square feet is the CF1R NCB. NCB actually stands for newly constructed building, but additions over 1,000 square feet use that form as well. Then probably I would say, if I had to guess, I would say 75% of additions use the performance approach, at least from what I've seen. It depends again on the size and the complexity and all that stuff. But a lot of additions really do use the performance approach. And when they use the performance approach, the CF1R will look very similar to what it would look like for a new house. It's called a CF1R Perf 01-E, okay? And for additions, you have a choice of how you want to model that house or that addition, okay? One of the more common ways is what we call E+A+A. And that is where the CF1R is going to show the floor area and the walls for the entire house, the existing house and the addition together. E+A+A stands for existing plus addition plus alteration. And the interesting thing about that is you might be adding on this big addition to the house and it has a lot of glass in it, and it would be very hard to make that addition comply by itself. And so what E+A+A does is you're sort of buying energy compliance by improving the existing house. So you can actually make your addition comply by adding insulation to the existing house, by replacing the windows in the existing house. So it's an interesting concept, and we call that E+A+A. Right on the CF1R at the very beginning, it'll tell you, it's like, I want to say it's like row 5 or 6. At the very first page of the CF1R, it'll tell you whether it's an alteration by itself, whether it's an existing plus alteration, or sometimes you can even model additions as a brand new house. You can say, I'm going to meet the requirements as though this addition was a brand new house. So those are your choices for modeling an addition. But E+A is very, very common because usually when someone's adding onto a house, they're going to do some remodeling to the existing house. Might as well get credit for improving it. All right, so the entire building is modeled. The compliance credit can be obtained by improving the existing portion. And then each component on the CF1R, your walls, your windows, your HVAC system, will have one of 3 designations. And it'll say, this is existing and we're not changing it, or this is added, this is new, this was not there before, like the wall for the addition, that would be added. Or it can say altered. So you might have windows in the existing part of the house that are being replaced. So those would say altered windows. So that would show up in the CF1R. CF2Rs, again, CF2R is think of it as an affidavit for the installing contractor saying that they installed the right stuff, okay? So it applies to basically any features that are installed or required as part of that addition. And again, that depends on the size and the complexity of the addition. But you're almost always going to have windows, right? And in addition, you're almost going to always have windows. And so there'll be a CF2R ENV01. So that's going to document that they put in the correct windows. You're going to have to seal any new walls and stuff like that. So that's going to be the ENV02 is going to have air sealing. You're probably going to have some new walls or ceiling with insulation in it. So that's the CF2R ENV03. You may or may not have new roof as part of the addition. If you do have a new roof and it requires a cool roof or a radiant barrier or something like that, you'll have to fill out an E and VO form. Again, all these forms are tracked for you by the HERS registry. The CF1R is uploaded to the HERS registry, and the HERS registry takes that CF1R and figures out all the forms that are going to be needed for that project and creates that list. That's the project status report, is a list of all those forms. Okay. So the LTG is lighting. All projects pretty much need lighting, right? Any kind of addition is going to have some sort of light fixtures in it, and you have to document that they met the mandatory measures. So that's the LTG 01. And then, of course, mechanical. If you're altering the mechanical system or adding a new mechanical system, the MEC 01 is where it's going to talk about what's going on there. By the way, that list there, those are all non-HERS measures. Those are all measures that are documented by the building inspector. Okay. The next list are HERS measures. Oh, let me go back again one time real quick. Notice all these CF2Rs here. Notice they all end in an E. That's how you know that those are non-HERS measures. This next list, these all end in an H. And the H stands for HERS verified. That means they also need a CF3R. These CF2Rs are going to have a CF3R that sort of goes with them. All right. So those are things like the MEC 20 is for sealed ducts. If you're adding or replacing equipment that's a ducted system, or if you're adding or replacing more than 40 feet of ducts, that triggers duct sealing. That has to be tested by a HERS rater. If you're installing a completely new ducted system, you have to test the fan watt draw. You have to test the airflow. If it has air conditioning, you might, and depending on the climate zone, you might have to test refrigerant charge. Okay. And then the MEC 27 documents indoor air quality mechanical ventilation. All right. That's only triggered for additions over 1,000 square feet. All right. Then the CF3Rs. So let me go back. So you got the MEC 20, the MEC 22, the MEC 25, and the MEC 27. Those are all CF2Rs. Those are all filled out by the installing contractor, but they end in an H. So those are HERS verified measures. The next list is the CF3Rs that go with those. So you got a CF3R MEC 20, CF3R MEC 22, MEC 23, MEC 25, MEC 27. Same numbers. The only difference is they have a 3, CF3R instead of CF2R. These are filled out by the HERS rater. This is where the HERS rater goes out, tests the ducts and say, yes, they pass. They test the airflow of the HVAC system. Yes, they size the ducts correctly. The CF2R is for the installer to say, yes, I did it correctly. The CF3R is for the rater to say, yes, I checked it and they did it correctly. Okay. All right, so all of the forms, the CF2Rs and CF3Rs, again, those are all put into the registry specific to that project. So this list that you see is only for that project. You go look at another project, it'll have a different list. And it depends on what the CF1R was, okay? And so that's a great place to go. Look for all green dots. Don't final a project until it has all green dots. If you're waiting to final a project and there's some red dots, both HERS providers registries have a little button where you click it and you can send an email to the responsible party and they can take care of those red dots, okay? All right, so the CF1R, the CF1R Perf 01 can be a pretty complicated document. And so we have this thing that we put together for Bayren. And Sean, did I send that to you? The what to check on a CF1R? Is that one of the handouts? If not, I'll make sure you get it. But it's basically a checklist. It allows you to go down through a CF1R Perf 01, and it just tells you what things to check for, what things are really important. Because there's a lot of stuff on a CF1R that's just not super important, okay? And you just kind of not worry about it. And so this really focuses on the important stuff, and it's just a little checklist, and we call it what to check on a CF1R Perf 01. All right, so that's available to you. All right, now this topic is sort of a hot topic, ADUs. I'm sure all you building department folks are kind of pulling your hair out regarding ADUs these days, and it's a big deal. Now, the big question with an ADU is it an addition or is it new construction? All right. And so we got these slides from the Energy Commission. You'll see the Energy Commission logo up here. These are all slides that are put together by the Energy Commission. You may have even seen a presentation that Javier or Chris O'Vera, some of those guys have put together and presented themselves. But I borrowed their slides, and these talk specifically about ADUs. So the question is it new construction or is it an addition? And that will determine the features that need to be on that ADU. If it's considered new construction, it's probably going to need solar panels on it. If it's an addition, it won't. All right, so newly constructed building is a building that has never been used or occupied for any purpose. An addition is a change to a building that increases the floor area and volume. Conditioned floor area and volume, that's very important. Conditioned floor area and volume. So if you have an unconditioned garage and you turn that into conditioned space, you've added conditioned floor area and volume. That's an addition. If you add a whole wing to your house, that creates newly conditioned floor area and volume. So that's clearly an addition. So even if you're not adding any walls, you're taking part of the house that's unconditioned and you're turning it into conditioned space. That's an addition, right? Newly conditioned space, any space being converted from unconditioned to directly conditioned, again, that's an addition. And then an alteration is any change to an existing building that triggers the energy code that doesn't fall into one of the other categories, basically. So if you're like you're adding windows, you're replacing a furnace, those are all changes to the building, but they're not adding conditioned space. We call those alterations. All right, so now we have to figure out, to determine whether an ADU is new construction or an addition, we have to figure out whether it's attached or detached, okay? So attached, never considered a newly constructed building. If you're building an ADU and it's up against an existing building, okay, either just a common wall or a common roof, common ceiling, things like that, it's attached. It's considered attached. And that's never considered a newly constructed building. So that's easy. That will always be an addition. If it's detached, there's a couple other little things you have to check for. If it's separate from the existing dwelling, okay, there's no common walls, no shared roof or ceiling. It can be a newly constructed building if it's built from the ground up. So it's freestanding, it's all new, that's detached. That would be new construction, by the way. It can be an addition if it's freestanding, but it's attached to a garage or something like that. It's not attached to the house, but it's attached to some other building. It could be the garage, it could be a pool house or whatever. That's considered, it's still considered detached because it's not attached to the main house, but it depends on whether it's attached to another building. So a new ADU is built sharing a common wall with an existing home. So this is the existing house. They build something next to it, but it's attached. That's shares a common wall. That makes this an addition. So this would be considered an addition. That's pretty simple. That's pretty straightforward. Then you've got a garage attached to an existing house, and you're going to convert that garage into an ADU. It increases conditioned floor area, so that's an addition. So the ADU is an addition because you're creating conditioned floor area and it's attached to the house. So both of these are considered additions. The ADU will comply as though it's an addition. If you've got a detached garage, it's not attached to the house, but it's an existing structure, and you convert that into an ADU, you are increasing conditioned floor area and volume. That's also an addition because you're using an existing structure as part of the ADU. That would also be an addition. If you're building an addition on top of an existing detached garage, that's also an addition because you're sharing a common roof ceiling with an existing structure, okay? So these are all examples of ADUs that would be considered additions, and they would be modeled, and the compliance would treat them as though they're additions. Now, let's look at some different ones. You got an ADU, you got an existing house, and you build a brand new structure all by itself, freestanding, nothing touching it. That would be newly constructed. All right. What if there's a breezeway? This one came up the other day. What if there's a breezeway? A breezeway is not considered, sharing common walls or floors or ceilings. So that would also be a newly constructed building. Right. So there are some permutations to this. If you're really, really not sure, the best thing to do is call the Energy Commission hotline. They've been answering this. They probably answered this same question 20 times a day. So they've got this figured out. So if there's some permutation of like this walkway or something like that, and you're just not sure, call the hotline. They've got it figured out. Converting an existing conditioned space like a conditioned basement to an ADU. All right, so basically what we have is conditioned space. Let's say it's a big house and they want to turn one of the bedrooms and bathrooms, they want to separate that. They want to isolate it from the rest of the house and turn that into its own dwelling unit. So it's already conditioned, all right? So you're not adding conditioned space or volume. It's certainly not new construction. That's actually an alteration. That's considered an alteration. There are some things, if you touch the HVAC system, you might need some HERS testing on that, but that's considered an alteration. It's a lot easier to make those comply. But then you're not really increasing energy use. You're really just sort of separating part of the house from another part of the house. All right, so just kind of in summary, new construction, you have a detached new building. You have a detached new building, but it is attached by a breezeway. Those are treated as new construction. The big difference between new construction and additions is these are probably going to need PVs. And the reason I say probably is because there are some exceptions to PVs. If it's like shaded by another structure or a bunch of trees and stuff like that, there are some exceptions, but mostly it will require PVs and they'll have to prove the exception. Additions do not need photovoltaics, PV panels. Okay. All right. To wrap this up, we're going to talk about some best practices for energy code enforcement, just kind of a summary. So if a project requires HERS test, usually triggered by some sort of HVAC change, it must be registered with the HERS provider. If that's the case, use the registry. Use the registry to track the forms. It's a great online tool. It's totally free to building departments to use. It's there for your benefit. At a minimum, make sure all required forms, CF1R, CF2Rs, and CF3Rs, are registered. Spot check the accuracy of the more important forms like Windows and HVAC. So what this is saying is, it's great to go on the registry and look for green dots. Once you're used to doing that, once you're used to requiring all green dots, the next step in your sort of development as an energy code enforcement person is to then start looking at some of those forms. Open up one of those forms and say, does this look right? Did they put in the right, did they say they put in the right equipment? What was the target leakage? What was the measured leakage? How much did they comply by? But the first goal, the number one goal, is make sure they're registered. Look for those green dots. And then when you're used to doing that, check those green dots and make sure that they did it correctly. If the CF wants to treat it similar to new construction, all right, use the what to check tool, because it's the CF1R Perfo one, like I said, it's a pretty complicated document. They can be 12, 14 pages long, even for an addition. And if they use the E+A+A, you've got to keep track of all, what's new, what's added, what's altered. And so use this tool, this checklist, to help you plan check that stuff. And the main part of the plan check is to make sure that the CF1R modeled a building that's representative of the plans. Are the wall areas the same? Are the window areas the same? Is the orientation the same? Did they model the furnace where it's supposed to be, the ducts where it's supposed to be, and stuff like that? All right. Leverage HERS test to reduce the amount of work for field inspectors. Know what the HERS test is looking for. Know what the HERS rate is looking for. And then you don't have to worry about that. If they have QII, the HERS rater is going to be inspecting the insulation really, really closely, which means the building department doesn't have to do it quite as close. It's still good for the building department to participate in that, but leverage that for you. All right, here's the additional resources. Here's the link to Energy Code ACE. They have some really nice resources for architects and designers. These resource guides here, these are really, really well done books, basically, that they put together. The Forms ACE tool, that's the thing I was talking about before. You can see the link there. It's go to energycodeace.com, and then the Forms ACE is the tool that helps you fill out the forms that I was talking about, those dynamic PDF forms. All right. Then for additional training, 3C-REN, this is their list there. BayREN has some training. BayREN invites people from all over the state, all over the country, honestly, to sit in on their training, just like 3C-REN does. So take advantage of that. One of this whole COVID thing, having to go online with all this training has really expanded people's opportunities for being able to get trained. I will say it's not as good as face-to-face training, because I do a lot of face-to-face training. I definitely prefer face-to-face training, but the flexibility, the ability to, I literally, had some people from Florida sit in on a class that I did for BayREN the other day, because it was about HVAC design. So, all right, so BayREN trainings, Energy Code ACE also has a bunch of trainings. Their training usually goes into a lot of detail. All right, they are very in-depth training at Energy Code ACE. All right, do we have any questions, Sean or Jordan? Are there any questions we need to stop and answer?
Yeah, Russ, one from the chat, and we'll open it up to everybody else after this. But Jonathan Hurst asks about what about, or how are junior ADUs treated with regard to the energy code?
Hi, Jonathan. You're gonna have to define what a junior ADU is. I'm not familiar with that term. I saw JADU mentioned in there, and I think it depends on are they adding conditioned square footage and volume, and then whether or not it's attached. What is the definition of a junior ADU? Anybody know?
I don't know, Jonathan. You can unmute yourself if you want to provide a little bit more clarification.
Okay, I can try, but it's a small space, less than 500 square feet, inside the envelope of the existing structure, and I think you can add up to 150 square feet. I'm sure there's more to it than that.
Okay, and it was conditioned space before. They're just converting it to a different dwelling unit. Is that basically what's going on?
Yeah, and I don't believe there's fire rated walls between it and the existing.
Okay.
I'm sure there's others out there that could correct me on lots of this. This is all so new.
Yeah, if it was already conditioned space before, let's say it was like a granny flat that had access through the house, and they want to formally convert it to a whole separate dwelling unit, but it was conditioned before. That's an alteration. That's not an addition. That's an alteration. And so it would be very similar to like replacing windows and stuff like that. So what did they touch? Did they open up any walls? Did they put in, does it have its own HVAC system? So it's treated like an alteration. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any additional questions from the group, or if you want to add them to the chat, now's the time. Okay, not seeing any come up. We'll just launch into this here quickly. Let me launch this poll here. Okay. All right. So, well, first off, thanks, Russ, for helping us all understand residential additions and the energy code. As noted, Russ is very available. You could reach him at russ@calcerts.com if you have any questions. I also wanted to thank BayREN for collaboratively offering this course with 3C-REN. It's partnerships like this that really help us further kind of round out our educational offerings. So thank you, BayREN, and thank you again, Russ. So before we sign off, I wanted to provide an overview of the many great offerings coming up for 3C-REN for you to take advantage of. I've also launched a satisfaction poll for you to provide feedback on this specific course. Next slide, please.
Ooh, it looks like I get to vote. I can skew the answers towards my benefit there.
So 3C Ren offers 3 programs: Energy Code Connect, of which this course is being offered, Building Performance Training, and Home Energy Savings. We're not going to spend too much time on our home energy savings program right now. I'll just note that our single family offering is kind of on hold right now in terms of a revamping and of our measure list. And we're also going out to bid on a competitive RFP for our new multifamily offering under that program. Next slide, please. So the Energy Code Connect program serves all building professionals, both public and private, across our territory. It offering services for everyone from plans examiners and inspectors to architects and contractors. It addresses both residential and non-residential applications of the Energy Code and Cal Green building standards. And we also partner with many professional membership organizations in the delivery of promotion of Energy Code Connect, like USGBC, our ICC chapters, and AIA. ECC offers 3 distinct programs, the Energy Code Coach being the first. That is a free over the phone, online, over the counter, and in the field service to help building professionals navigate the ever-changing and complex energy code. The service provides mentoring and support from local experts. So please call our Code Coach hotline or submit your questions using our online form. We also offer, the Energy Code Connect program also offers training each month with a variety of free interactive online courses like you're participating in today. We'll also return to soon, hopefully, in offering hands-on and in-person courses once it's safe to do so. All of our courses are taught by expert instructors like Russ or Inbalance Consulting, Franklin Energy, as well as others that have worked in the California Energy Code space and green building standards a lot over the years. Our courses are designed to increase overall energy code comprehension, compliance, and enforcement. And like I said, when in-person trainings resume, we'll be sure to feed you all again. I promise you that. And then lastly, the Energy Code Connect offers regional forums, which is an opportunity to explore aspects of California's energy code that are relevant to critical policy issues facing our region, from emerging trends and code updates to challenges and opportunities in its application. They bring together all building professionals and create a local networking opportunity for professionals within our region. And they're held 3 to 4 times per year. Our next one, focusing on the heat pump water heater market in our region, is being held on March 11th. So we all hope you can attend. It's going to be a really good one with a lot of great speakers, and you'll see some more information on that later, as well as the flyer. Next slide, please. Similar to the Energy Code Connect program, the Building Performance Training program serves current and prospective building professionals. The trainings offered are geared towards architects, contractors, and real estate professionals, to name a few. Our focus will expand to better serve underserved and hard-to-reach workers as well. The BPT program offers expert instruction covering technical skills related to building science principles and systems for higher performance buildings. Some topics include air sealing, heat pump technologies, zero net energy, building principles, and a lot more. We also focus on soft skills such as sales, marketing, and communication techniques to grow your business. All of our trainings provide professional education credits, including AIA, ICC, and more. And we also plan on offering certifications such as NAR, or the National Association of Realtors, Green Building Designation, as well as Passive House, to name a few. BPT equips workers to thrive in an evolving industry as the building industry evolves to provide solutions to climate change, affordability, resilience, and occupant health and safety. BPT helps workers adapt and stay current with changes and industry best practices. For longtime professionals and those seeking career pathways to the industry, building for performance training sharpens skills and builds your knowledge, and helps businesses provide added value to their customers. Next slide, please. So to attend 3CREN's trainings and events, learn more and register at 3cren.org/events. You can view the course calendar, access on-demand resources from our partners, and suggest future trainings. To contact our codes coach, you can do so online at 3cren.org/codes or call 805-220-9991. Lauren, Hotel, or another one of our expert code coaches are available to help you anytime. And then lastly, to learn about our residential services under our home energy savings program, please head to 3cren.org/home or call 805-541-3806. Next slide, please. So in closing, I want to remind everyone that this course has been approved for 1.5 continuing education units under the International Code Council and 1.5 learning units under the Architectural Institute of America. Please contact us if you need CEUs and forgot to provide your ID during registration. You'll also be seeing an email in your inbox later today or tomorrow containing a very brief satisfaction survey. Please, please, please help us out by taking that survey and telling us your thoughts. Your feedback really gets used and ultimately helps us deliver better events and discover other topics. And then finally, a couple of other Energy Code Connect courses and building performance training courses that are coming up. We have our Energy Code Coach office, or actually that's going to be canceled, unfortunately, due to low registration. So that's a typo there. But we have Intro to Passive House. We have heat pump water heaters for the Energy Code, and that's geared towards the private sector on February 17th, next week. And then we have another focused course on electrification in the 2019 Energy Code on the 25th. And then, as I mentioned, we also have our upcoming forum on March 11th, focusing on heat pump water heaters and the regional market. Next slide, please. So thank you again, Russ, Bayren, and all of you for attending. We all really appreciate it, and we have time. So if there's any additional questions for either myself or for Russ, we can stick around. All right, not seeing any. Last chance. Thanks, Sylvia. All right, folks. Thank you so much. With that, we'll sign off from here and greatly appreciate your attendance. Thanks, Russ.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Russ.
Take care.
Thank you.